My name is Hannah Ford, and I was 20 years old the day I found out my college fund had a balance of $11. Not 11,000. $11.04. I stared at that number on my phone screen in the middle of the campus library, and for a second I thought my banking app had crashed. It had to be a glitch. There was no other explanation because 2 years earlier that account had $140,000 in it. Money my great-aunt Louise left me the year I turned 16. Money she wrote a letter about. Money my parents swore they would only touch for tuition. I did not know yet that the number on my screen would end with my brother's name written on a business loan application, and my mother's signature under a line that was never supposed to be hers to sign. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. Welcome to Family Drama Stories. If you are new here, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. I read every single one. I grew up in a small town outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in a house with green shutters and a crooked mailbox my dad never fixed. My father, Gary, sold insurance for a regional company for 26 years. My mother, Denise, worked part-time at a dentist's office and ran our household like it was her second job, which in a way it was. I have one sibling, my younger brother Cole, 3 years behind me, and if you had asked anyone in our town to describe the two of us, they would have said I was the serious one and Cole was the fun one. That description sounds harmless. It is not harmless. In my family, serious meant invisible. Fun meant forgiven. I brought home straight A's every semester from 3rd grade on, and my parents would glance at the report card, nod, and go back to whatever they were doing. When Cole brought home a C and a note from his teacher about talking too much in class, my mother would laugh and say, "That's just Cole being Cole," and my father would ruffle his hair like he had won something. I am not telling you this to complain about my childhood. I am telling you because you need to understand the math that was already running under the surface of our family, long before any of this happened with the money. When I was 16, my great-aunt Louise passed away. She was my grandmother's sister, a widow with no children of her own, and she had always been close to me in a quiet way. She used to send me books in the mail with notes tucked inside the front cover. When she died, her lawyer called my parents to a small office above a pharmacy downtown, and I sat in the waiting room while they went inside. When they came out, my mother's eyes were red and my father looked pale in a way I had never seen before. Aunt Louise had left almost her entire estate to me, in a custodial account meant for my education, to be released to me directly when I turned 21, or used by my parents strictly for tuition, books, and housing before then. The lawyer, a careful older man named Mr. Whitfield, explained it to all three of us together. He said Aunt Louise had been very specific about the language in the trust. He said the word irrevocable more than once. At the time I did not understand why he kept repeating it. I understand now. That night, my mother sat on the edge of my bed and told me how proud Aunt Louise would be watching me go off to a good school one day. She said we, meaning her and my father, would take excellent care of the money until I needed it. I remember believing her completely. Why wouldn't I? She was my mother. For 2 years, nothing seemed unusual. I finished high school, got into a solid state university 2 hours from home, and my parents drove me up with a car full of boxes and a cooler of sandwiches my mother packed. I remember standing in my dorm room doorway, and my father hugging me stiffly the way he always did, and saying, "You worked hard for this, Hannah." I felt, for one afternoon, like the invisible daughter had finally been seen. My roommate that first year was a girl named Priya, a biology major from outside Pittsburgh who became, without either of us really planning it, the closest thing I had to a sister. Priya's family was loud and messy in a way mine never was, for kids all talking over each other at Thanksgiving, but she used to say the thing she envied about my family was how organized we seemed. "Your parents have a plan for everything," she told me once, half joking. I laughed along with her because from the outside we probably did look that way. Organized. Careful. A family with a plan. I think about that comment more than I should, looking back. Because the truth was my parents did have a plan. It just was not the one either of us thought. I studied accounting, which people sometimes find funny now, given everything that happened later. I liked the certainty of it, the way numbers either balanced or they did not, the way there was always a right answer if you looked hard enough. My professors used to say that behind every set of numbers is a story, and if the numbers do not make sense, you have not found the real story yet. I did not know then how much that sentence would matter to me one day. The first small crack came during my sophomore year, though I did not recognize it as a crack at the time. Cole had graduated high school by then and decided college was not for him. Instead, he wanted to start a business. He talked about it constantly at family dinners over video call, always with a new angle. First it was a clothing brand, then it was flipping sneakers. Then, finally, it became something he called a marketing agency, helping small businesses grow on social media. My parents lit up every time he brought it up. My father, who spent 26 years in a job he quietly hated, started talking about Cole like he was some kind of prodigy. Denise, my mother, began referring to Cole's plans as our family's next chapter. I remember one call where my mother asked, almost too casually, whether I remembered the exact name of the bank that held my education account. I told her, confused, and asked why she needed it. She said something about updating paperwork for taxes. I did not think twice about it. Looking back, that question sits in my memory now like a small stone I stepped over without noticing. Around the same time, my father started leaving his laptop open on the kitchen counter more often than usual, always angled toward the wall whenever I walked past. I never thought much of it back then. Fathers leave laptops open all the time. It is only now, looking back with everything I know, that I understand he was probably reviewing loan paperwork he did not want me to see, sitting in the same kitchen where he used to help me with algebra homework years earlier. A few weeks later, Cole texted me out of nowhere. We were never a texting kind of sibling, so it stood out immediately. He asked how much money I thought I would actually need for the rest of college. It was a strange question, phrased like he already had an answer in mind and wanted me to confirm it for him. I told him tuition, housing, and books were expensive, and I needed every bit of what was in that account. He said, "Yeah, no, totally makes sense," and then went quiet for the rest of the conversation. I filed it away as Cole being weird, the way he often was, and moved on with my week. Around that same time, I got an email from the university's bursar office that I almost deleted without reading. It was a routine notice about my payment plan being updated. I skimmed it, saw a confirmation of my current semester being paid in full, and closed my laptop. I did not look closely at the account number listed on the notice. I did not have any reason to. Why would I question a bill that said paid? That spring, my mother mentioned in passing that they were helping Cole with, quote, a little bridge funding for his agency. She said it lightly, the way you would mention buying a new couch. I asked how much, mostly out of curiosity, not concern. She waved her hand and said, "Don't worry about the details, it's family money, we're handling it." That phrase, "we're handling it," would come to mean something very different to me by the end of that summer. I went home for winter break that year and noticed small things that did not add up, but each one alone seemed too small to question. Cole had a new laptop, the expensive kind, sitting open on the kitchen table with spreadsheets full of numbers I did not understand. My father had started calling him a founder instead of my brother, like it was a formal title. My mother had printed out a logo design and taped it to the refrigerator, right where my honor roll certificates used to hang when I was in high school. I noticed it, felt a small sting, and told myself I was being petty. This was Cole's moment. I had already had mine. What I did not know, sitting at that kitchen table eating my mother's pot roast and half listening to Cole talk about client acquisition and margins, was that the paperwork for his agency's business loan had already been submitted 3 weeks earlier. And on that paperwork, under collateral and funding source, sat a number that matched my education account almost exactly. I would not find that out for another 5 months. By then, the account would already be nearly empty, and my parents would already have an answer ready, one they had clearly rehearsed, about family and sacrifice and how I did not need it as much as Cole did. There was one more moment from that winter break I have to tell you about because I did not understand its weight until much later. On my last night home I could not sleep, so I went downstairs around midnight for a glass of water. The kitchen light was on. My mother was sitting alone at the table with a stack of papers in front of her, the good kind of pen she only used for important things resting on top. She startled when she saw me, closed the folder fast, almost too fast, and said she was just doing some bill paying. I remember thinking it was strange that bills would need that much paper, but I got my water and went back to bed without asking a single question. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count. The folder, the good pen, the way her hand moved to cover it before I even said a word. I flew back to school in January with no idea that the money meant to carry me through graduation was quietly being rerouted, one transfer at a time, into a business that had not made a single dollar of real profit. I sat in my dorm room that first night back, unpacking my suitcase, completely unaware that the version of my life I thought I was living was already gone. I just did not know it yet. The first real proof that something was wrong came from a stranger, not my family. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late February, and I was standing in line at the campus coffee shop between classes when my phone buzzed with an email from the financial aid office. The subject line said, "Action required, outstanding balance." I remember laughing a little, thinking it had to be a mistake, since my mother had told me just weeks earlier that everything was, in her words, all set for the semester. I opened the email standing right there in line, and the barista had to call my order twice because I was not listening anymore. My tuition payment had bounced. Not been late. Bounced. The email said the automatic payment scheduled from my parents' account had been returned for insufficient funds, and if it was not resolved within 10 business days, I would be dropped from my spring classes. I stood frozen for a second, coffee forgotten, replaying my mother's voice in my head. "All set. Don't worry about the details." I called her right there on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, my hands cold even though it was not that cold outside. She picked up on the fourth ring, and I could hear the television in the background. I told her about the email. There was a pause before she answered, the kind of pause that tells you someone is deciding how much to say. She said, "Oh, that's probably just a timing thing with the bank, I'll call them." I asked her directly, "Is there enough money in my account to cover this semester?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Hannah, honey," she finally said, "we've had to make some adjustments." Adjustments. That word sat in my chest like a stone. I asked what kind of adjustments, and my mother's voice shifted into the tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable and in control, the tone she used on parent-teacher conferences and church committee calls. She said Cole's agency had hit, quote, "a small rough patch," and they had used some of my account as, quote, "a short-term bridge," but they were going to pay it all back before I even noticed. I had already noticed. That was the whole point. I asked how much. She would not give me a number. I asked when they were going to pay it back. She said, "Soon, honey, don't stress about it. Focus on your classes." I hung up the phone standing on a sidewalk in the cold, and for the first time in my life I did not cry. I just felt very still, the way you feel right before you understand something enormous is about to change. That night I called my father, hoping for a straight answer, which was a mistake, because my father has never given a straight answer in his life if a comfortable lie was available instead. He answered on speaker, and I could hear Cole in the background, laughing at something on the television. I asked him the same question I asked my mother. "How much of my account is gone?" There was a long silence, and then my father said something I will never forget as long as I live. He said, "Your fund did more good funding your brother's future than it would have sitting there doing nothing for 2 more years. Doing nothing. That was how my father described my education. Doing nothing. I did not scream. I wanted to. Instead, I asked him one more question, quiet and even. "Did you sign anything using my name?" The silence that followed that question lasted longer than any silence I had ever heard from my father in 20 years of knowing him. Then he said, "We'll talk about this when you're calmer," and hung up. I sat on the floor of my dorm room hallway that night, back against the cold cinder block wall, and I thought about Mr. Whitfield's office above the pharmacy, and the word irrevocable, and how many times he had repeated it. I thought about Aunt Louise's handwriting inside the front covers of the books she used to send me. I thought about the logo taped to the refrigerator where my honor roll certificates used to be. And I decided right there on that floor that I was not going to call my parents again until I understood exactly what had happened to my money. The next morning I walked into the campus financial aid office and asked for a full printout of every payment and transaction connected to my account for the last 2 years. The woman behind the desk, a kind older employee named Ms. Alvarez, must have seen something in my face, because she did not ask any unnecessary questions. She just printed the pages and slid them across the desk. I sat in a study room with the door closed and went through every single line. The first year looked normal. Tuition payments on time, in full, exactly what you would expect. Then, starting in the spring of my sophomore year, the pattern changed. Instead of one clean payment from the account each semester, there were multiple smaller transfers, going out on irregular dates, in amounts that did not match tuition, housing, or books at all. $14,000 here. $9,000 there. $22,000 in a single transfer in March, the exact month Cole had first mentioned his, quote, bridge funding. I did not have access to see where the money went from there. Not yet. But I did not need to see it to understand the timeline. My tuition had been paid consistently until the same month my brother's business needed cash. After that, everything went sideways. I texted Priya a photo of the printout from the study room, my hands shaking a little as I typed. She called me within a minute, not texted, called, which was not something either of us usually did in the middle of a school day. "Hannah," she said, her voice careful, "this looks like more than a family disagreement." I remember staring at the wall of the study room while she talked, listening to her ask questions I had not thought to ask myself yet. Did I have copies of the original trust documents? Did I know who else had legal access to the account? Had anyone besides my parents ever signed anything on my behalf before? I did not have good answers to any of it, and hearing myself say "I don't know" out loud 3 times in a row was its own kind of wake-up call. That night I made a promise to myself that I would not go into the next conversation with my family without answers again. That same week I did something I had never done before. I called Mr. Whitfield's office directly. I still had his card, tucked inside the front cover of one of Aunt Louise's books, which felt almost too fitting to be an accident. His assistant told me he had retired 2 years earlier, but that his son, David Whitfield, had taken over the practice and still had all of his father's old files. I made an appointment for the following week during my spring break, back home in Harrisburg. I did not tell my parents I was coming early. I drove the 2 hours home in silence, no music, no podcast, just my own thoughts circling the same questions over and over. Why would my parents risk something like this? Did they really believe I would never find out? And underneath all of it, a colder question I was almost afraid to ask myself. Did my mother, sitting on the edge of my bed all those years ago promising to take care of my money, already know she would break that promise one day? David Whitfield's office looked almost exactly like I remembered his father's, dark wood shelves, the same faint smell of old paper and coffee. He greeted me warmly, said he remembered my case file because his father had spoken about it more than once, calling it one of the most carefully written trusts he had ever drafted. That word again. Carefully. He pulled the file, and within minutes his expression changed from polite to focused. He turned his computer screen toward me and said, "Hannah, before I explain anything else, I need you to look at this signature and tell me if it's yours." He turned the monitor further so I could see the whole page clearly, and I noticed his jaw tighten slightly, the small involuntary reaction of someone who has done this job long enough to know exactly what a fraudulent document looks like before the client even says a word. I stared at it for a long moment. The letters were close enough to fool someone glancing quickly, but the H was wrong, looped in a way I have never once looped it in my entire life, not since 2nd grade when I first learned cursive. I looked up at David Whitfield and said very quietly, "That is not my signature." He nodded slowly, like he had already suspected as much, and said, "That's what I was afraid you'd say." Then he leaned back in his chair and told me something that made the room feel very small and very quiet all at once. He said the trust my great-aunt had set up was not a simple account my parents could dip into whenever they decided to. It had specific, binding restrictions his father had built in deliberately, restrictions that made unauthorized withdrawals a far more serious problem than a family disagreement about money. He said one more thing before I left his office that day, something that would sit in my mind for the rest of that spring break. He said, "Hannah, I don't think your parents understood what they were signing when they went around this trust. But that doesn't change what it means legally. And I think you're going to want to know exactly how deep this goes before you talk to them again." Before I left, David asked me a question I had not expected. He asked if I wanted him to request the bank's full internal transfer records now, while the trail was still fresh, or wait until I had spoken with my family first. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, all set, "Don't worry about the details," and I thought about my father calling my education doing nothing. I told David to request the records that same day. Waiting had already cost me 2 years. I was not going to lose any more time being polite about it. I did not drive straight home from his office. I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes, just breathing, watching people walk in and out of the pharmacy downstairs like it was a perfectly normal Tuesday. Somewhere in that town, my parents were probably eating lunch, maybe even talking about Cole's agency landing a new client, completely unaware that a folder with my forged signature in it was now sitting on a lawyer's desk with my name attached to a case file. I remember thinking, almost calmly, that this was the first time in my whole life I knew something my parents did not know I knew. felt strange. It felt like the ground shifting under a house that had always seemed solid. I drove home that evening and sat through dinner with my parents and Cole like nothing had changed. My mother asked about my classes. My father asked if I had settled the tuition issue yet, in a tone that suggested he expected me to have simply let it go. Cole talked about a new client his agency had signed, some local gym chain, and my parents beamed at him across the table the exact same way they always had. I smiled and nodded and asked polite questions and did not say one single word about David Whitfield or the folder sitting in my bag by the front door. I had decided something in that parking lot, and I was not going to break that decision over pot roast and small talk. I was going to gather everything first. I was going to know more than they thought I knew for as long as I possibly could. The bank statement did not lie, and that is what scared me the most. My name is Renata Voss. I was 20 years old the week I found out my college fund was gone, and I want to tell you what I found when I stopped crying and started digging. I did not fly home. I did not scream at anyone. I sat in my dorm room with my laptop open and my hands shaking, and I made myself do the one thing I am good at. I read documents. The fund was called the Voss Education Trust. My grandmother Louise set it up when I was 7 years old, right after my dad lost his job at the plant and the family almost lost the house. She never trusted my parents with money, not after that year. She told me once when I was maybe 14, sitting on her porch with sweet tea sweating on the table between us. Renata, she said, money in a family is like water. It finds the lowest point. I am not going to let it drown you. I did not understand what she meant back then. I understood it now. I called the number on the old paperwork my grandmother had given me before she died 2 years earlier. It connected me to a trust officer named Mr. Halloway at a regional bank 3 states away, not the local branch my parents used. He asked for my name and my grandmother's name, and then he went quiet for a second. Miss Voss, he said, I have been trying to reach you for weeks. That sentence made my stomach drop. He told me the trust was not a simple savings account. It was an irrevocable education trust, which meant nobody could just walk in and take money out for whatever they wanted. It had rules. Withdrawals could only be made for verified tuition, housing, books, or approved education costs, and only with my signature as beneficiary once I turned 18, alongside the trustee's approval. My parents were never the trustees. My grandmother had named a lawyer as trustee, and after she died, that role passed to Mr. Halloway's office. So how did the money disappear, I asked. He told me $11,000 had been withdrawn 4 months earlier. The withdrawal request had my signature on it, and a notarized letter saying the funds were for tuition and living expenses at a school I was not even enrolled in. I have never heard of that school, I told him. Neither had I until this moment, he said. That is exactly why I have been calling your cell phone, which apparently has not been working, and your parents' number, which has been going straight to voicemail. My phone had been working fine. Nobody had told me he called. I asked him to send me copies of everything. 2 days later, a thick envelope showed up at my dorm, and I sat on my bed and spread it all out the way you would lay out puzzle pieces, except every piece of this puzzle made me feel a little sicker. The signature on the withdrawal form was close to mine. Close but wrong. My real signature has a little loop on the R that swings up before it comes back down. This one just curved. Small thing. But I have signed my name probably 10,000 times on homework and forms and my learner's permit, and I know my own hand the way I know my own face. The notarized letter listed a college in another state, one I had never applied to, never visited, never even looked up. And the notary stamp on the bottom belonged to a woman named Carol Jennings. I knew that name. Carol was my mother's coworker at the dental office. She had come to our house for Thanksgiving twice. I sat with that fact for a long time before I moved again. Next, I looked at my brother Dallas. He was 23, 3 years older than me, and had spent the last 2 years jumping between jobs and half-finished plans. 6 months ago, he had announced at Sunday dinner that he was starting a business, something about custom sneaker resale and a streetwear brand he was calling Voss Supply. My parents had lit up like he'd announced a cure for cancer. My dad shook his hand across the table. My mom cried actual tears of pride. I remember sitting there thinking quietly, where is the money for that coming from? Dallas had no savings. He had debt. But I told myself it was not my business, and I went back to school, and I let it go the same way I had let 100 small unfair things go over the years because fighting about it never once changed anything. Now I opened his social media, and I made myself look at it like evidence instead of like my brother's life. 6 months ago, right around the time my grandmother's money disappeared, Voss Supply had launched with a website, a small warehouse space, and an ad campaign. Dallas posted a photo of himself holding a giant check like the ones you see at charity golf tournaments, except this one just said Voss Supply Launch Capital, and the number on it was $11,000. I stared at that photo until my eyes hurt. He had posted proof. He had literally posted proof, thinking it made him look successful, never imagining his little sister would one day be sitting cross-legged on a dorm bed lining it up next to a forged trust withdrawal with the exact same amount. I called Mr. Halloway back the next morning and asked him what happens now. He explained it slowly, the way you would explain something to someone who is about to be very upset. A withdrawal made with a forged beneficiary signature and a fraudulent notarization is not a legal withdrawal at all, he said. In the eyes of the trust, that money still technically belongs to the fund, which means the trust has a legal claim to recover it, and depending on how your state treats notary fraud, this could also become a criminal matter, not just a family disagreement. Criminal, I repeated. Falsifying a notarized document is a crime, Miss Voss, he said gently. I am not saying that to scare you. I am saying it because you deserve to understand exactly what happened to you. I did not feel scared. I felt something colder and steadier settle into my chest, like a shelf sliding into place. I asked him not to contact my parents yet. I wanted to understand the whole picture first, not just the money but who knew what and when. I called the college listed on the fraudulent letter and asked their admissions office if a Renata Voss had ever applied. The woman on the phone checked twice and told me no record existed at all. Of course it did not. The letter was never meant to survive a real question. It only needed to survive a bank clerk moving fast on a Tuesday. I thought about calling Dallas directly and just asking him. Part of me wanted to hear him lie to my face, just to know exactly what kind of person he had become. But I stopped myself. I had learned enough in 3 days of digging to know that confronting anyone too early, with no proof lined up yet, would just give them time to get their story straight. My grandmother did not raise a fool, even if she was not around to say so out loud anymore. Instead, I drove 2 hours to the branch where Carol Jennings worked, on a Thursday when I knew my mother had a hygienist shift and would not be at the front desk. I asked to speak with Carol about a notary question, nothing more. She came out smiling, professional, until I set the withdrawal letter on the counter between us, and asked her to walk me through what she remembered about notarizing it. Her smile did not disappear right away. But her eyes did something people's eyes do when they are trying very hard to remember a lie they told months ago, and cannot quite retrieve it. I don't recall the specifics, she said carefully. We notarize a lot of documents. You would remember notarizing a document for a 20-year-old girl who was, according to your own state's law, required to be physically present in front of you, I said. I was not physically present in front of you, Carol. I was 2 states away registering for fall classes. Her face went pale in a way that told me everything I needed to know before she said a single honest word. I need you to leave, she said quietly. Please. I did leave. But I left with something better than an admission. I left knowing for certain that whatever happened without me in that room, exactly like I already suspected, and that Carol knew it too. That night I called a lawyer my roommate's father knew. A woman named Priya Anand who handled trust and estate disputes. I told her everything, laid out in order the way I had laid the papers out on my bed. She listened without interrupting once, which somehow made it worse because it meant she was taking it seriously. This is textbook trust fraud with a forged notarization on top of it, she told me. You have documentary evidence, a paper trail, a clear financial motive, and a witness who just admitted she wasn't present for a legally required act. Renata, this is not a family misunderstanding. This is a case. I asked her what a case would actually mean for my parents, for my brother. For the family Thanksgiving table I would apparently never sit at the same way again. She was honest with me. Restitution to the trust, most likely, she said. Possible civil liability against your parents and your brother jointly, since the money clearly funded his business. And Carol Jennings is facing her own exposure for notary fraud, separate from your family entirely, whether you push for it or not, because it's now documented and I have an obligation to report it once we file. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment. Do you want to move forward, she asked. I looked at the photo of Dallas holding that giant novelty check one more time. His grin so wide, so certain nobody would ever check the math. I thought about my grandmother on that porch, sweet tea sweating on the table, telling me money finds the lowest point in a family if you let it. Yes, I said. I want to move forward. Quietly and correctly and all the way through. Priya told me the first step was a formal demand letter to the trust, and a notice to my parents that the withdrawal was being disputed as fraudulent. She said once that letter went out, there was no taking it back. I told her to send it. 2 weeks later, my mother texted me. Family dinner Sunday. We need to talk about some things as a family. Your father is making the brisket. I read that message 3 times. They still thought I did not know. They still thought I was going to sit at that table and let this go quiet the way I always had. I typed back one word. Okay. I packed my folder of copies into my bag that same night, checked the drive time, and told Priya I would call her the moment I left my parents' house on Sunday, whatever happened. Brisket was on the table, and so was my forged signature, and only one of us in that kitchen knew it yet. I arrived at my parents' house Sunday afternoon carrying a plain manila folder instead of the overnight bag I usually brought home. My mother hugged me at the door, too tightly, too long, the kind of hug people give when they are checking to see how much you know. My father called out from the kitchen that dinner was almost ready. Dallas was already at the table, scrolling his phone, wearing a new jacket I was fairly sure I had helped pay for without ever agreeing to. We sat down. My mother served the brisket like this was any other Sunday. My father asked about my classes. I answered normally, gave him the easy version, the fall semester version, while the folder sat closed on my lap under the table like a stone I was holding in place. Halfway through dinner, my mother set down her fork and folded her hands the way she does before she says something rehearsed. We wanted everyone together, she said, because we have something wonderful to share. Dallas's business hit its first big milestone this month. Voss Supply just crossed $50,000 in sales. My father raised his glass. To Dallas he said, "Proud of you, son." Dallas grinned and ducked his head like he was embarrassed, though I could tell he was not embarrassed at all. And Renata, my mother said, turning to me with a bright, careful smile, "We hope you can be happy for your brother. Family invests in family. That's what your grandmother would have wanted." I set my fork down. "That's actually why I wanted to talk today too," I said, and I opened the folder. I laid the first page on the table, in the space between the brisket and the green beans. "This is the withdrawal form from my education trust," I said. $11,000 taken out in March. My mother's smile did not move, but something behind her eyes did. I laid the second page down beside it. "This is my real signature," I said. 15 samples from my school records, notarized by the trust officer's office for comparison. And this is the signature on the withdrawal form. A forensic examiner the trust hired says they do not match. My father set his glass down slowly. "Renata," he started. I kept going because I had promised myself I would say all of it before anyone else got to speak. "This is the notarized letter that says the money was for tuition at a college I never applied to," I said, laying down the third page. "And this is Carol Jennings's notary stamp on it. I visited her at work 2 weeks ago. She admitted to me she was not physically present for that signature, which state law requires." The kitchen had gone completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. "And this," I said, sliding out the last page, "is a photo Dallas posted himself 6 months ago, holding a giant check for $11,000, the exact amount that left my trust the same week." Dallas's face had drained of color. He looked at the photo like he was seeing it for the first time, like he had genuinely never once connected his celebration post to the crime that funded it. My mother found her voice first, and it came out sharp. "You went behind our backs," she said. "You had us investigated like criminals." "I did not investigate you," I said quietly. "I investigated what happened to my own money. Those turned out to be the same thing." "Your grandmother would have wanted us to help your brother," she said, her voice climbing. "She would have wanted this family to stick together. My grandmother named a trustee specifically so nobody in this family could touch that money without a real reason," I said. "She did that because she already knew you. She told me herself years ago that money finds the lowest point in a family if you let it." I did not understand what she meant until 3 weeks ago. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. "This is insane," he said. "We are your parents. You do not sue your own family." "I have not sued anyone yet," I said. "I filed a dispute with the trust." What happens next depends on what everyone in this room decides to do right now. Dallas finally spoke, his voice thin and fast. I didn't know, he said. I swear I didn't know where the money came from. Mom just said it was a family loan. I thought it was from you guys, from savings. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. Is that true? I asked her directly. Did you tell him it was your money? She did not answer right away, and in a family like mine, silence has always meant yes. I turned back to Dallas. $50,000 in sales does not mean $50,000 in profit, I said. Do you even know if the business can pay back what it owes, once this is a formal claim against you and not just a family secret? He put his head in his hands. I have maybe $6,000 in the business account, he said. I spent most of it on inventory and the storefront lease. I don't have $11,000 sitting anywhere. My father was pacing now, his face red. You are going to destroy this family over a piece of paper, he said. I did not destroy anything, I said, keeping my voice level even though my hands were shaking under the table. A forged signature and a fake notary stamp did that. I just found the paperwork. My mother tried one more angle, softer this time, the guilt angle she had used my whole life. We can figure out a payment plan, just us quietly, she said. You don't need lawyers for this. We're your parents. I looked at her for a long moment. I had loved her my whole life in the uncomplicated way kids love their mothers, and some small stubborn part of me still wanted to fold, to say, okay, let's keep this between us, let's protect the family name at my own expense one more time, the way I always had. I didn't fold. I already have a lawyer, I said. Her name is Priya Anand. She sent a formal notice 2 weeks ago, which I believe you received and never mentioned to me. The trust is seeking restitution. Depending on what the bank and the state decide about the forged notarization, this could also become a criminal matter for whoever falsified that letter. Carol did that part, my mother said quickly, too quickly. That wasn't me. You asked her to, I said. She told me that herself, more or less, when her face couldn't hide it even if her mouth wanted to. The room cracked open after that. My father shouted that I was choosing strangers over blood. My mother cried the kind of tears that had worked on me 100 times before, and now just looked like a performance I had finally learned to watch from the outside. Dallas kept repeating that he didn't know, that he never would have taken it if he'd known, and for the first time I actually believed one part of what he was saying, even if it did not change what came next. I did not stay for dessert. I gathered my folder, squared the edges the way I had practiced doing a dozen times in my dorm room, and stood up. I love you, I said to all 3 of them, and I meant it, which was the strangest part. But I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen so everyone else can stay comfortable. I never have that option anymore. I walked out to my car and called Priya from the driveway, my hand still shaking as I dialed. The months after that moved slower than the discovery had. The trust claim was heard through arbitration rather than open court, since Priya said it would resolve faster, and with less public exposure for everyone, including me. My parents were ordered to repay the $11,000 to the trust, with interest, structured as a repayment plan tied to my father's wages since neither of them had that much sitting in savings. Dallas, once it became clear he had personally profited from and continued operating a business built on stolen trust funds, was named jointly liable for a portion of the debt, separate from our parents, which meant Voss Supply's early profits went straight into repaying money that was never his to spend. Carol Jennings lost her notary commission entirely and paid a fine to the state for the false notarization, a consequence that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the oath she broke the day she stamped a document for a girl who was 2 states away. I finished that semester on a reduced course load, working 2 part-time jobs to cover what the trust could no longer pay out while the dispute was active. It was hard. It was also, strangely, the first time in years I felt like my life belonged entirely to me instead of to whatever emergency my family needed covered next. Once the trust's remaining funds were released back into my name the following year, I did something I think my grandmother would have understood completely. I did not spend it all on myself. I used part of it to finish my degree, and I put the rest into a small scholarship fund at my university for students whose family finances had been disrupted by something outside their control, the kind of quiet, unglamorous emergency nobody posts a giant check about. I still talk to Dallas sometimes, carefully, the way you talk to someone you're rebuilding trust with, one small conversation at a time. I have not spoken to my father since that Sunday. My mother and I exchange occasional messages, polite and thin. Nothing like what we used to have. People ask me if I regret opening that folder at the dinner table instead of handling it quietly, just the two of us, just family. I tell them the truth. I tried quiet for 20 years. Quiet is what let it happen in the first place. If somebody in your life has ever told you to be proud of something that was secretly built on what they took from you, I hope you ask the questions I almost didn't ask. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done at that dinner table. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story.